Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you for joining the Spiritist Talk series promoted by the United States Spiritist Federation every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I am very happy to be here to host this talk by Dan Assisi, who will be leading our live with the theme, Why is the World Going Bonkers? I would like to take a brief moment for a couple of announcements. The first is that there's a podcast like series, Psychology and Spirituality, A Bridge to a Better Life, based on the works by Joanna de Angelis. There is a new episode every Friday, so be certain to tune in. The weekly talks are based on the works by Joanna de Angelis, offering a safe space to confront, compare, correlate, and expand spirituality concepts from a psychological lens, bringing insights, actionable tips, and real world advice to help you lead a better life. Please subscribe to the notifications of the new episodes at the USSF YouTube channel. Also, the Federation is hosting the 17th U.S. Spiritist Symposium on September 30th of this year in Portland, Oregon. The symposium will focus on the topic of spiritual path to mental balance, with a full day program including talks, panels, Q&A sessions, youth panel, kids, and youth activities. Mark the date on your calendars. Also, if you notice on the screen, there is a QR code. If you want to help the United States Spiritist Federation produce more publications and promote Spiritism to everyone, scan the QR code on your screen for your donation. Now, let's return to Dan Assisi. Together with everyone who is watching this live broadcast now, I want to give you a very warm welcome. It is wonderful to have you with us today to discuss why is the world going bonkers? I am sure all of you are as eager as I am to hear from Dan. Before he starts, though, to enlighten us in this hour, let me formally introduce him. Dan Assisi is an award-winning author and internationally celebrated speaker who has delivered hundreds of talks and conferences on spirituality in over 60 cities on 4 continents. Known for a deep mix of thinking and witty humor, Dan takes a unique approach to spirituality that is steeped in reason to remind audiences everywhere of our spiritual nature. Dr. Assisi is a founding member of the Spiritist Institute and of the California Spiritist Association. You can also find him as the host of the Spiritist Conversations podcast. Daniel holds a doctorate degree in education and a master's in public administration with a graduate certificate in public policy from the University of Southern California. Please take this opportunity to send your questions during the presentation using the chat window. Dan has reserved time to address your comments and questions once he concludes this presentation. And so I present to you Dan Assisi.
Good morning, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so very much, Bradley, for that really kind introduction. And I'm always very excited to be here with you, talking about spirituality in general. And I am honored, as usual, to have the opportunity to share some time with our friends from the United States Spiritist Council who do such great, wonderful work. This morning, well, morning for me, almost afternoon for some of you, as I'm here in California. We are going to talk about a topic that might be going through everybody's mind. And the idea here is simple. We look at the world outside and we think, is the world going mad? Is it going bonkers? And we just ask ourselves, why is that happening? Where is God? What's taking place? When will this thing change? Will it change? Is this the end of the world? Are things just continuously getting worse? And what can we make of all of this? So today, with this perhaps non-traditional topic, or at least the name, we hope to explore what really is happening out there in the world. What can we do to help and understand when it will possibly get better for all of us? And my hope is that by doing that, by exploring what's happening, understanding a spiritual process that is taking place, we may bring a little bit of hope and joy to our hearts. And rest assured that things are going to be okay, even if they may take a little bit longer to settle down. So, by going together through this journey, my goal is to remind you of some things that you may already have learned through Spiritism. And if you haven't, that's okay. We'll expose you some basic topics. We are not going to be talking about very sophisticated concepts, but we may be talking a little bit about things that we might not have thought of before or we might not have engaged with recently. And in doing that, I think that we might have a better understanding to why the world is going bonkers today, why things seem to be so difficult. So I invite you to join me in this journey. I would love to have your comments and your participation. I hope to make enough time for us to be able to exchange ideas. If you're out there and you're feeling like you might want to chime in and let us know what you think, because after all, this really is meant to be an exploration. It's really meant to be a conversation, let's say a starter of sorts, a fire starter of sorts, where you get to think about some of these concepts, take that to your daily life, and understand as you are living day by day, why are people behaving in this particular way, and why things seem to be so up and down and so different in all points. So, without a lot of delay here, let's jump into the topic, and hopefully we can make sense of this thing together and find some answers and some solutions, if not some understanding of why things seem to be going crazy these days in the world of ours. So we start with the simple idea that we all know that there is a lot going on out there in the world. We know this because we know that there is war. We know that there's lots of discrimination going on. We know that there's violence happening everywhere in our globe in different ways. And we know that we have had a lot of intolerance. We have political challenges where people cannot sit together in the same table to exchange ideas. Many of our holidays are becoming harder and harder to deal with because members of our family have a different perspective, and we cannot even exchange, ideas and concepts. We have major battles, socially speaking, about culture, about where we should be or not, what we should do or not, who could be here, who could not be there. And all of that has led us in many different ways, very much so, to hopelessness and apathy. The world seems to be struggling a little bit with all that is happening, and it feels sometimes like we are going on a downward spiral where more and more we just see more examples of things not working out the way we think it should, especially when we believe in God and think that things should be getting better because we are evolving. This hopelessness is so deep nowadays that we have become very cynic about everything else. We are very sarcastic, we are very pessimistic. We are not exactly in a great spot. We have seen the rise of mental health issues, and we also known for a couple of years now, a couple of decades I should say, that suicide rates have been increasing. In short, it seems like collectively we feel like things are not headed in the right direction. And we don't feel really like the energy to do anything else different. Some of us are struggling with a sense of purpose. We're feeling a little bit of morose. We don't want to do things. We don't have the energy for it. So all of that is a result of this atmosphere of these events that are taking place. And so while we can pick up a newspaper or watch news on TV or YouTube, we know things are not working out great out there. And it's only normal that in our hearts, we'll begin to feel this hopelessness, this sense of apathy, and think that maybe this is it. Maybe things don't get better. maybe things are only going to get worse. And so we ask ourselves, what kind of explanation could we have to this? What kind of explanation from a spiritual perspective can we have to this so that we may understand what's happening? Because what's happening here is a clash of our beliefs that the world is getting better, that there is a God, and that we're going to be okay, with what we see out there in the world. So what could be happening? And what we want to really investigate today is exactly that. Well, the good news is that we know what's taking place. The challenging news is that it may take a little bit of time for us to figure it out, but let's start with the beginning. So what is happening spiritually in our planet today? Well, simply put, what's happening is that we are living through a key moment of Earth's spiritual evolution. We are in a crossroads of sorts of where we need to kind of make progress spiritually because we have been lagging a little bit. And that means many times that people talk about the end of times, the separation, the biblical separation of the wheat from the tares. And in Spiritism, we have even used the term planetary transition to signify this moment where we are going to transition from a world that's not so happy and that's very difficult and challenging to live in to one that will be better. So we know that there is this inflection point. We know that we are in this key moment of Earth's spiritual evolution. But we also ask ourselves, why now? Why is it happening now? Why are we going through this now? Could this not have happened before? Could this somebody else have dealt with this? But why this moment? And the answer is also very much simple and intuitive for us. Well, the idea here is that we are struggling to keep pace in our moral evolution. And this is something that's important for us to understand and pause a little bit on, because if we are to bring our spiritual knowledge to the matter, which we want to do because we want to use our spiritual perspective to understand what's happening in the world, we will know that we are all evolving through reincarnation, and that every life that we have, every lifetime that we live, we learn a little bit more, and then in contact with each other, we grow. And we grow in many different ways. We grow emotionally, we grow intellectually, and we grow spiritually. But the important piece is, if we look out to the world, we know that we have had a lot of progress on the intellectual side, which is great. We are leading more comfortable lives than we have ever led before in the history of mankind. However, by everything that we have shared and that it's out there in the world, you also know this. We have struggling to keep pace with our moral evolution. That is to say, we are making some progress, but we are not moving as fast as we should probably do. And that becomes a problem when we actually have a lot of folks who are holding us back. Basically put, we need change. There is a large number of people who are beginning to lag a little bit in our moral evolution. And by doing so, it is weighing down the entire planet. And by that, I mean, Earth has also to evolve and become a better place. And because so many of us are not keeping pace with our moral evolution, it's beginning to threaten the overall evolution of the planet. That is to say, it's beginning to be harder for others to make moral progress because there is so much going on that is not conducive to spiritual development. So, because we have reached this critical mass of sorts where we're beginning to get a little bit stagnant and we're not moving forward, we need a little bit of a kick. We need a little bit of a move. And that is why we are facing these different challenges like war, violence, and discrimination, because they will force us to move forward. And that is a lot. And that, I think, we know, we have heard of, we have understood in many different ways that these difficult moments, they are going to be challenging for us, but they have a silver lining that they will force us to pay attention to things that we should have paid attention to before and have not yet fully figured out. And by that, I mean with war, so we might develop a little bit more of a sense of empathy and caring. We will be perhaps more tolerant with all the discrimination challenges we're seeing out in the world. We may pay attention to the fact that we are immortal spirits who really are just temporarily imbued in a physical body that may look this way now, but it may look differently next time around. And that the color of our skin or our gender or sexual orientation is really not a defining factor of who we are today. But it is important, therefore, for us to accept everybody the same because we're all spiritual beings. So, all of that, all these tensions, all these sparks, all these hurdles and barriers are going to have us pay attention to important things that we have not yet figured out. And together and collectively, we are going to make significant steps forward over the next decades and perhaps centuries. But that becomes the question that everybody wants to know. So, how will we move forward? What is happening out there? How does this work? What kind of mechanism, what kind of process is out there in the world that allows us to understand these things a little bit better and make sense of it all? Well, the good news is that all of this evolutionary process takes place through reincarnation. And here is a very important point for us to talk about, because we know already that reincarnation, through our experiences with the spiritual world, through many communications, through many scientific studies that continue to pop up and reiterate to us that reincarnation is a fact, that we are spiritual beings evolving through reincarnation. And that we already know. We get better every lifetime. We face challenges. We learn. We have difficult relationships. We figure it out. We improve. And every lifetime brings us some sort of progress. However, what we perhaps may not be thinking about is the larger picture of the reincarnatory plane. And by that, I mean there is a very complex mechanism of reincarnation and spiritual migration that is taking place in this moment to help us move forward. And this is the how that I find very interesting, because it allows us to understand how things are happening and why things seem to be so out of control when in fact we are going through a process. So what I want to do with you here is to take a couple of minutes just to zoom out and think about the spiritual perspective from a reincarnatory angle to what's happening on Earth. So bear here with me as we walk through some things that might make sense to us. All right, so here we go. Okay, so I call this the Great Spiritual Shuffle. And what you are seeing here is a visual that by no means is the best visual in the world, but I put together to help us understand and to help myself understand. Well, we know that we live on planet Earth. And we know that at any point in time, we are incarnates here on planet Earth. That is, we are spirits with a physical body living on Earth and having an existence. That is physical and spiritual at the same time. We also know that we reincarnate. That is, we experience life like we were talking about, because reincarnation is key for us understanding a lot of things. And when we are done with this lifetime, we go back to the discarnate plane, and there we also evolved as spirits without a physical body. So we go back and forth between the surface of the earth in a life that is physical and spiritual, and to the spiritual plane where we are living in a spiritual existence and so forth. That we knew. But what sometimes fail to consider that there is a significant number of spirits who are not currently incarnate on Earth, that are waiting their turn to come to Earth, or that are also just learning in the spiritual planes, right? And I think that you see there that the little red lights are meant to symbolize these different planes of existence, around the Earth. But all that to say that the spiritual population of Earth is made out of incarnates and discarnates. We don't often think about this. We only think about the 8 billion people or so that we have on Earth, but we probably have 3 to 4 times that amount on the spiritual plane, as well as we see through the works of the Brazilian medium Francisco Xavier. So there is this constantly going back and forth. However, there is something interesting here that we need to pay attention to. From these discarnate spirits, right? From these spirits who are not temporarily using a physical body and they are in the spiritual realm, some of them are planning to come back, which means that we have some elevated spirits who are doing really well, have advanced morally, and they are now beginning to reincarnate on Earth to help us through these challenges that we are facing, to help us tackle this selfishness, this lack of me first, this attitude of me first, this lack of collaboration, and figure things out. And with their presence, with their moral example, they are going to inspire us to do better and to help us progress. Like it has always been, right? We have tutors and mentors in school that exemplify those values and those attitudes that we may want. And by looking at them, living with them, interacting with them, learning from them, we are going to get better. So that is happening right now to help us elevate the overall moral standing of the planet. And that is great news, my friends. However, we also know that there are other spirits reincarnating, because not every spirit that is on the discarnate side is an elevated spirit, right? And I am calling this developing spirits. These are spirits like myself and yourself, people who, and I hope, this is where I hope, I don't mean to say that I speak for you, but I'm making an assumption. This is the many of us who are not elevated spirits, but who are learning through every lifetime. We're slowly progressing, we are keeping pace, and by our squiggly progress, we are moving forward. And if you were just us, the developing spirits and the elevated spirits, Earth will continue to progress. And that would be great news. However, we know that there are other people, other group of spirits that I'm going to call here spirits on the bubble, right? Spirits who are failing to keep the average line of progress, so to speak. And they are sometimes holding the class back. If we think of Earth as a school, we can imagine that it's difficult for a teacher to teach a class when all the students in that class, or at least a majority of the students of the class, are not studying, are not doing their homework, are not interested. It's hard for the good students that are in the class, who are doing their homework, who are really trying to learn something, to learn anything if the majority of spirits around them are not interested in what's taking place and might be wreaking a little bit of havoc. So these more difficult students, these more hardened spirits who are not perhaps wishing to develop their moral aspect as much, I call them on the bubble. They're on the bubble. And by that I mean they could make progress, they could not, they are maybe not where they should be, but they're struggling. And these spirits are also reincarnating right now. And as a matter of fact, there is more of them reincarnating now than before, because this is their last chance to make up the work that they have not yet done, to see if they're going to stay with the class, or if they will need to have additional work done and perhaps some tutoring and different experiences in another classroom. Will they need to be pulled out of this classroom to get help and learn in a different environment that might be better for them? And so allow us, the developing spirits, to be able to learn from the elevated spirits and move on. And so this is the moment that we are talking about. This is the moment in which we are living, and where we are seeing a greater number of these spirits, these hardened spirits, who oftentimes would hold us back, reincarnate right now, because they're getting their last chance in this planet for now. They are being asked to really show if they are on board with the program and if they can catch up to continue to be part of this classroom, of this planet. And if they are unable to do that, they will be removed and be sent to a different classroom where they will have an opportunity to learn and understand that their behavior was not good for them and was not good for the whole. And so that means that if they don't really get it in this lifetime, they will be exiled to a different place for their spiritual evolution. That is to say, they are going to be moved and have a chance to reincarnate in a different planet that perhaps is not at the moment that Earth is finding itself, perhaps it's earlier in an evolutionary scale. And they will then understand that their behaviors were holding back the people who wanted to study and move forward. Because now they will be the more elevated students, they're going to be the more learned students, and they are going to feel what it is to be held back by other students who are farther behind from them. And being put in this situation will allow them to become the tutors themselves. They will become to develop that sympathy and that connection and understand that they need to change their behavior, because now there's other people holding them back, and they will continue to develop by moving forward and helping those people. For us, this is something that has happened with us as well on Earth. As a matter of fact, we have a chance to read in Spiritist literature, especially in a couple of wonderful books. One of them is called Toward the Light, and another one is called Exiles from the System, no, Exiles from like the System of Capella, where we are told by different sources and different spirits that such a thing has happened to Earth before, in the sense that we have received a spiritual generation from a different place that has come as a result from not meeting the standards of that other system that was ahead of us. And those spirits on the bubble, they came and they helped Earth progress. So a lot of our ancient civilizations had members of this different system that came down, this different dimension, to help us gain knowledge in the areas of engineering, philosophy, ethics, science, and so forth. And that has helped us move forward. And that is a very big idea, a very confusing idea. And sometimes it seems like, whoa, it seems like sci-fi. But when we begin to think about divine justice and the presence of God in everything as the creator of all things, it makes sense. What our spirit friends, our more elevated spirit friends, are telling us is that there is a beautiful cosmic system of learning in which there are different classrooms around the universe where spirits evolve. And every classroom has a level, has a lesson. And if we are able to keep pace with the instruction and the teaching and the education that is going on, then we continue to be with our group of people. If we advance perhaps too fast, we have an option of migrating to a more elevated classroom. And if we struggle, we may be pulled down to a different one that will teach us and provide us with the supports and the opportunities for us to learn and catch up. And when we catch up, we then may return to where we were before. We say that because it's important for us to understand that this is what is happening in the world today. This is a key moment of our spiritual evolution, our collective spiritual evolution, where the elevated spirits who, our mentors and guides who are responsible for the progress of Earth, are saying, we need to make sure that the spirits on the bubble, the hardened spirits, are not holding everybody back and preventing Earth from moving forward. So now they have a chance to come to Earth at a greater numbers than before, because what used to happen is, to ensure that Earth was moving on, only a certain amount of them would be allowed at a time. But our spiritual friends are saying there's so many of them living in our overall atmosphere, right, as a discarnates, more of them are coming in to give them this opportunity, this last chance to find out whether they are going to stay with our classroom or whether they are going to move on. If they are not able to keep pace, if they are not able to learn and continue to develop morally, they will be then exiled to a different planet where they will have a chance to learn. And that is complex and difficult enough. But the idea here is simple. If we removed a lot of those who are perhaps hardened, then it will be easier for us, the majority of us, developing spirits, to really move forward and enjoy the teachings and the example of elevated spirits. However, there is more. Because we have been behind for a while and this has been happening, and because we need to step up, we also have another factor that needs to be taken into consideration here. We also have, as we are able to read in our spiritual and the Spiritist literature, especially in the works of Manuel Filomeno de Miranda and a wonderful series of books that you may have had a chance to read called Planetary Transition, Dawn of a New Age, and so on. We see that we also have a group of volunteer migrant spirits who are coming into our planet to help us elevate our moral standing. And this is also a tricky part. The good news is that these volunteer spirits that come from places which are more evolved than Earth and that have evolved slightly different, they have no history on Earth. So they do not come tainted with the challenges that we have faced. They have very little understanding of some of our historical traditions and the ways that we do things. And that is great because they are helping us to get unstuck and be less stubborn about the ways we are doing things. At the same time, that can also be challenging because they do things differently. And how the way they do things are not exactly very clear to us. And that makes it challenging for a group of spirits who are trying to make progress and who are perhaps on the bubble to have the way that they do things challenged or questioned. It becomes even more chaotic. So it is no surprise that in many different ways, all that is happening out there is really can feel really chaotic and a lot, right? We have spirits who are having their last chance and who are not perhaps at the level that the earth really needs to be, creating a little bit of havoc and breaking down our institutions and our values. We have us trying to make sense of it all, trying to just develop and move forward. We have a number of elevated spirits who have been with Earth in a while that are calling us forward. And we have this migration of different students. Let's put it this way, exchange students, foreign students who are coming into our school and who are doing things differently. And we have a group of spirits that if they don't behave, they are going to be removed from our school and taken to a different school. So in the middle of all of this is where we are today. And by doing that, by understanding that, it makes sense that we comprehend that the world seems to be going bonkers because there is a lot of change taking place. The world is not going crazy. It's not going down the drain. It's just going through this very difficult moment where all these different groups are coming in at the same time, and we are going to make sense of it all. It's almost like it is the beginning of a school year, and we have the great students who are returning. We have the students who have been there for a while. We have students who are not doing well. We have foreign students, and we're all trying to figure it out how that's going to be. And there's a breakdown of different structures. There is a culture clash in many different ways because of all these different people with different ideas and different perspectives. And that's understandable when you have so many different groups happening at the same time. So all of that to say that right now, what is truly happening is that we are witnessing a spiritual revolution on Earth. We are at this key moment where these different groups, the elevated spirits, the evolving spirits, the hardened spirits, the migrant spirits, are coming together and meshing with each other. So it's no surprise that our institutions are being challenged, that our values are being challenged, that our perspectives are being challenged, because there are those who want to pull towards selfishness And there are those who are pulling towards selflessness. And there are those who want to hang on to the ways that we have done things before because that's how we always been before. And we remember that, even if unconsciously through many different reincarnations. And there are those who are new to the school and they don't need to do things the way we've done before. They think that they can do things in a different way. And that really rocks the boat for those of us who are not all yet figured out yet. We get defensive about the way we think things. We don't like change. We don't like innovation. We don't like this different approach. And we struggle with this concept of spiritual diversity. If you think that we are struggling with the concept of diversity on this planet, you now have an understanding why it's such a big deal right now. It is a tiny reflection of the diversity challenge that we are facing on a spiritual level. We are dealing with a much broader diversity of spiritual magnitude with our migrant helpers who are coming from different places and who themselves are not just one group of people, but many different people, many different spirits who are incarnating as a favor to us to help us elevate the overall moral tonus, the overall moral standing of this planet. So what we are witnessing here is a change of priorities, a change of approaches, a change of habits and values that is taking place. And so what we see out in the world is that process playing out. It's only natural that when we are diving deep and changing important things like our values, our priorities, our perspectives, our beliefs, that there is going to be friction and there is going to be tension. But we're not just witnessing this, and this is an important point that we want to make. We're also living through this. We're called to help. We are part of this spiritual revolution. So, whereas sometimes we place ourselves in this observing situation and we look, the world out there is going bonkers, and we are worried about how we stay well and protected from everything else that's going on, which is only natural. The moment is calling us to take a more active role to also help this phase go faster. And it's only natural too that we ask our question, when will things get better? When will all this evolutionary process that we talked about, all this reincarnatory mechanism that's taking place with spirits coming in, spirits going out, when will it get better? Because it's tough right now. And that is indeed a great question. And don't feel bad at all if you're asking that. Don't feel selfish or self-centered at all if you're doing this. All of us are asking that, and we should know. Well, the good news is that it is getting better. The challenging news for us is that it will take place in a couple of reincarnations. It may seem like that is not fast enough because we want a change in 1 or 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. But from a spiritual perspective, that is really fast. Those hardened spirits, those older bomb spirits, they need a chance and to have this last incarnation, to have this last chance. And if we think about this, that means that they need to live a life of 60, 70 years to see how they do and have this experience. But we also know that we don't all reincarnate at once, right? We have babies being born at all points in time. A generation doesn't start just in 1 year or a month or 2 years, that it takes time for that reincarnatory process to take place. Some of them come now, some of them come next year, some of them are born 5 years from now, some of them will come 10 years from now. So if we add a gap of 20 years, so to say, to the whole lifetime piece, let's imagine that we live for 7 years, let's add 20 years to it. So we're really saying it will take about 90 years, 100 years for us to have the chance to have these on the bubble spirits have their chance to be here and find out whether they are going to be able to keep the pace. Then, are you saying that we still have 100 years of these challenges as the world's still going to get worse before it gets better? No, I'm not. The good news is that we're also... Oh, look at that. Siri's trying to talk to me on my phone, on my watch here. Siri, wait a second there, and then we'll figure things out. The good news here is that we read in a couple of different works, especially those works that I have mentioned before by Manuel Filomeno de Miranda, that the reincarnatory process of us welcoming the volunteer migrant spirits from different spheres and dimensions who are more evolved and do things differently has already started. As a matter of fact, many of them have already started to reincarnate on Earth since the 1970s and the 1980s. That's good news, which means that this process has already been happening for a little bit. And if we are then able to use a rule of thumb of about 100 years that we talked about, the 70 years of a lifetime, the span of a lifetime for the reincarnating spirits, plus 20 years of a generation incarnating, right? And 100 years so forth, which means that since the 70s and the 80s, we have already started this process. So we are a good 50 years in, so to speak, right? Maybe 40 years in, which means that in another 50 years or so, we will begin to see progress on Earth. That is incredibly fast from a spiritual perspective. That is amazing that we can do such a big change in 100 years. And that's sort of what's been happening anyways, right? On the intellectual side, we know that the 20th century, from the 1900s now, a lot of progress has happened on Earth technologically, intellectually, and the same is about to happen morally. It's going to be a beautiful thing that we are going to have a chance to see that. However, we know that this takes time. So if we are today 30, 40 years of age, thereabouts, this additional 40 and 50 years are not going to happen in our lifetime. We might be able to see the tail end of this moment. We might be able to see at the end of our physical lives on Earth that the Earth will begin to improve. And that should bring a little bit of joy to our hearts, because it means that our children, who perhaps are also tasked with the process of reinventing our collective experience, of raising the bar morally on what we need to do here on Earth, are going to be able to truly welcome this new age, the beginning of this new age of regeneration on Earth. And that, it is really great news. It also is great news because we know that if we are able to keep pace, and I trust that all of us will, who are really interested in doing so, the next time that we come around in our next reincarnation, perhaps 50, 60, 100 years from now, who knows when we are going to reincarnate next? Obviously, we need to finish our current lifetime, and we do not want to hurry that, right? We are going to take our time, finish this lifetime. We do not need to hurry into the spiritual world just to come back. But when we come back, we are going to begin to enjoy a very different Earth, the beginnings of this new age where we are going to move away from selfishness and we're going to go towards selflessness. We are going to move away from competition based thinking and go towards a collaborative mode of looking at the world. And we are going to begin to pay more emphasis not to what is physical and immediate and appeals to the senses, but we are going to start to focus on what matters spiritually and emotionally. And that will be a fantastic place to be. So I imagine that in a couple of reincarnatory cycles, in 200, 300 years, when we are back again 2 or 3 more times, Earth will be fundamentally different and it will be in the up and up. And that is going to be so amazing. And with that in mind, we ask ourselves then, what do we do until then? What is it that we need to do? Should we just wait and sit and let this thing go and pan out? Well, things will take place. And we know that God is in control and that our mentors and spiritual benefactors are shepherding this process, that they are taking care of this evolutionary piece. They're keeping a close eye into all that is happening and making sure that we are making progress, for sure. But it also means that we have asked to be born in this time and place. We have, as we have talked about before, the honor of being incarnates here in this key moment of this evolutionary process, which is something to be said because we are in this threshold of evolution. We are at this crossroads of our own spiritual path where we too must make choices to help the world progress. There's a lot of competition, so to say, to be on earth. There is a greater spiritual population on the spiritual realm surrounding earth than there is on earth, which means we can't simply go in and out of life. We have to wait an opportunity to have a chance to reincarnate. And we have been granted that reincarnation because we have committed to working on ourselves, but also helping society as a general. By uplifting our hearts and souls, we're also doing that for those around us. So, what do? We have a spiritual commitment to help. And we should also make sure that we hold hope in our hearts. Because now that we understand the process, now that we know that we are living in this moment of great transition, that we see mentioned in the Bible as the end of times, which is really not the end of the physical world, but the end of a phase of our world, right? It's a generation that needs to pass so that this new generation of regeneration may take place. It's happening right now. And we understand that's happening through reincarnation as spirits come in. And we have a chance to come and redo some of our work and have some friends from other places also coming to uplift our moral standards. So we know that through this reincarnatory cycles, one or two more reincarnatory cycles, and we are going to be on the tail end of all of this. And that is great news. So we should have hope in our hearts and not let the challenge of the moment get to us, because we now understand spiritually and remember that we are under the guise of our spiritual benefactors, and everything else is going to be figured out. And when that happens, we are going to be in a better place. So we need to hold hope in our hearts because now we understand. We understand what's going on. So when we are struggling with the way society is behaving, when we are unhappy about the decisions that are taking place out there in the world, when we are fearful for where the world's going to be, we can take a breath, stop, and remember that we are in this key moment, and there's reason to have hope in our hearts because all of this is going to get figured out. All of this is playing out in a way that is going to be beneficial to all of us who are staying, to all of us who are coming, and to all those who are going somewhere else to learn. We're all going to continue to progress. But we also need to go ahead and know that we need to be the change. We also have a moral imperative to see this world through this moment. And that means that we need to live the change that we want to see. We have heard of the teachings of the Christ for 2,000 years now through many different lifetimes. And we need to see them anew, not in the way that we saw them before, not in the habits and perspectives that we have created over 2,000 years. We need to change the face of the Christ, of his teachings. We need to think about them differently. And that's why I bring here a slightly different picture of the Christ than perhaps we're used to. This beautiful drawing called The Prince of Peace by an artist called Akiani is a slightly different interpretation of what the Christ would look like. Not that it matters how the Christ looks like, but it does matter that we see his teachings anew as a highly elevated spirit who came to be with us and show us the way even before we really needed to understand it. And now his teachings are coming back to us, and we're beginning to realize that his invitation lingers in the air for millennia, and that they have a place for us in our hearts and in our day-to-day lives. They speak about the fact that we are immortal spirits and that we survive the physical body, that we need not be worried about just this existence because he has come back as the only one who ever has in this planet to show us that we are going to be okay, that we are going to survive the perishing of our bodies, and we are going to live in spirit and come back as many times as we need to make that progress that we talked about. He is reminding us of the importance of focusing on what truly matters, our moral evolution, to gather treasures in heaven. That is to say, to gather treasures, spiritual treasures, that will be with us through many reincarnations, and not worry about the treasures here on earth where moth and rust take away. He is reminding us to be kind to each other, to work with each other, that we are siblings, that we need to work out our differences now while we're still here, or before we go to the spiritual realm, and we don't have the time to work on those anymore because we might be pulled apart into different places. So the call of the moment is to live, and not just understand, but live these teachings that are made clearer to us now through Spiritism. Now that we have an opportunity to interact with the spirits in a more structured fashion, to understand how mediumship works, we are able to gather this knowledge that allows us to go back and understand Christ in a whole different way, and see him not just as a religious figure that's imposing things like many of us have done in previous lives and many of his followers do today, but that in fact he is a bastion of wisdom. He is a trailblazer of spiritual freedom that points the way to us, that we can be happy, that we can understand and return to our spiritual essence and put that at the forefront of our daily actions, and help the world transition from this self-centeredness to this selflessness, to a collaborative environment instead of a competitive place, and to really, really, really embrace this unique and beautiful opportunity that we have to enjoy time with each other. So, when we are really talking about the world going bonkers, we are really saying that this is just a small part of our spiritual history. That if we get too close to what's happening right now and we forget about the spiritual side of things, then we are going to feel this hopelessness and this apathy. But if we heed the call to zoom out and understand what's taking place from a spiritual perspective, which Spiritism can do so well by explaining the reincarnatory cycles, the spiritual migration and immigration that's taking place, then we can put our hearts a little bit at ease, saying that there is a process taking place, one that has taken place before here on earth, when we welcomed folks from before to help us elevate too, and how it takes place in many different orbs throughout the universe. And that this exchange mode where students graduate from one school to the next or get relocated to another one is just a natural step in the cosmic evolutionary path of all beings. We can then rest assured that even if the world seems to be going bonkers outside, we know there is a reason for that, and that we are going to be able to make a change. So whatever it is that you do today or tomorrow or the next weeks or the next month or even the next year, keep that to your heart. Dive into your spirit studies so that you may be reminded that we are temporary travelers in the physical plane, and that in fact we are spiritual beings who are undergoing this process of evolution. And that is done socially with others, in conjunction with others, and experiencing these moments of trials and tribulations will make us better people. And now that we understand that all these different groups of spirits at different levels are interacting, it is no surprise to us that there is so much friction and so many challenges in the world, but that we have a part to play. So I wish peace for all of us. I hope that we may be able to internalize these ideas, keep the teachings of the Christ and the elevated spirits in our minds and hearts, and be that change that we want to see. And that we hope that we may be able to keep in touch, continue to develop our bonds and friendship, feel a sense of empowerment and renewal, responsibility and opportunity for us to craft a better world. So the world is potentially, it feels like the world's going bonkers, but it really is. Everything is under control. We are just progressing through a difficult, bumpy part of our road. And with that, we pause to see if we have news from any of our friends. And if anybody wants to chime in any way, not that you have to, but we do have a little bit of time, I believe, and we will be glad to do that.
Thank you very, very much, Don, for your insights and most especially for the encouraging reflections you provided today. So, as I indicated, we are now open for any comments and questions from the audience. And the first one we have from the United States Spiritist Federation. What can we control and what can't we in our daily living?
That the $1 million question, right? Or maybe the $0 question, because we don't need money for that one. But that is a great question, and I think this is a wonderful reflection that has been handed down from the ages to us. We are living in a world where, with all this apparent chaos out there, we are feeling a need to control everything we can. We try to control what other people do. We try to control the world. We try to prevent people from doing things. We try to make things be just the way we like them and that we are used to, because we've done it this way in so many different reincarnations, and we're just used to things a specific way, and we don't want people to mess with it. But the truth of the matter is, the only thing we can control, and that's barely, it's ourselves. Other people, we cannot. Not we are responsible for. We want to help, and we may want to offer opportunities to work together and do better things, but we have to be okay with the idea that people will make their own choices in their evolutionary path, that they too have free will, just like we do, that we have an option to choose our own path. People will make choices that may be different from those that we are used to. And when we are used to things in a specific way, that is very hard, because we want people to do things the way we do, because we think those are the best ways. And that's comprehensible. However, we are now being called to return to our spiritual essence and understand that people will do things the way that they see fit, even if that's not the best option for them according to our perspective. If we take a second, for instance, to consider how the spiritual benefactors, the more evolved spirits, even Jesus, sees our behavior and do not interfere to the level that we would want to interfere with others, that's very inspiring, because we know that we don't always make the best choices, but nevertheless, our mentors and guides often give us the opportunity to make our own choices, make good decisions, and make not so great decisions, so we learn. So we must also respect that of others. And I think that is a component that we are missing in the world today, and a lesson that we have to learn. There's so much intolerance out there because we are clinging to this idea that we can control other people, that we want to tell them what to do, and they can only live by our rules and our ways of doing. And I think the main challenge of our times is that we are having that question. We are having that questions from people from a different backgrounds than us, that we are now having a chance to live with, that perhaps we were not exposed to before. We are being questioned by the new generation that's incarnating amongst us, and challenging our values and saying, the values that we have are not the values that I want. We see all kinds of things playing out socially. We see this different generation challenges. We are witnessing, for instance, this moment after COVID, where a lot of people were shuffling jobs, and there was even a term called quiet quitting that some of you may have heard, in which the older generation is complaining that some younger folks are doing their work and then stopping to do their work, that they're not going beyond what their professional work is, because they want to go home and enjoy their lives. And the older generation is questioning this and saying, no, you should do more than, you should stay until 9 p.m. at night working. You should work harder at your professional job, because that's what we have done. And they cannot quite understand that this new generation, it's not quiet quitting. They're just choosing to prioritize their lifestyles, their life at home. And that's a change in values that is really hard for us to understand. That's just one example in general of what's happening. This culture clash, these culture wars that are happening, are just natural manifestations of our desire to try to control others, to do things the way that we have always done. But we just have to let go of that. We just have to work on ourselves. That's the only thing we can control. And like I said, barely. As we focus on being the change, everything else will fall into place. Just because people do things differently does not mean that they're better or worse than you. Just because they are doing things differently doesn't mean that the things that you are doing are wrong. It is okay for us to take different roads to the same path. We just have to reflect on whether we think we are doing the best thing for us spiritually.
Thank you very, very much for that. Most helpful, then. So we have a question from the TVCEI International Spiritist Council. Is shutting out the news of the world the only solution to achieving calmness?
Another very important and reflective question that is one that many people oftentimes think about and say, maybe I can just run away from all of this, right? Maybe I can just go to a mountaintop and avoid the world and I'm going to be okay. Maybe I should just become a contemplative monk and run away from the challenges of the world. But we also know that if we do that, if we shut ourselves out from the world, it will not make the world a better place. It would just brings us a false sense of control over our own existence. And so, more important than trying to avoid the stimuli from behind, from outside to protect us, is to work on ourselves to such an extent that we are not phased by the stimuli from behind. To be happy is not to have the absence of challenges, because we know that is not going to happen. We are going to be continuously be exposed to challenges because challenges is what help us grow. So to be happy is not to do nothing. To be in retirement, so to speak, is not the way for us to solve our challenges. What we really want to do is get to a point where we are so in touch with ourselves and understand our spiritual nature that we recognize challenges not as burdensome or as punishment, but as opportunities for growth, and welcome that because we know that we are going to grow. So the way to do this world, the way to handle this world, is to really just be so okay with us that the news from the outside are not going to bother us. They're just going to inspire us to be the change that we want to see. And that is really hard. I understand. We may have to do our daily reflections. We might have to do our daily meditation. Maybe we need to remind ourselves every single day that we're spiritual beings and this too shall pass. But once we do, we are going to be able to go anywhere, be with anybody, and still feel the joy and love that comes for us from above. That's a key part of this. Let's not shut ourselves from the world, because if we do, then we cannot contribute to the world improving. And we also have a responsibility, as we also read in the Spirit's book, in that lovely question 132, not only to evolve, but to play our part in the creation, that is to say, to help the world evolve too.
Most helpful, Dan. Thank you very much for that. We have a question from the U.S. Spiritist Federation. Can we measure our moral evolution to know how far or how little we have progressed?
We can. We can. We all are looking for the measuring stick or for their scorecard, right? We just want to just want to know, how are we doing? Am I making the grade? Am I passing the class? Will I stay here? Will I move? Will I be sent to another classroom, right? All of those are very natural questions, and important ones too, because we should try to take a pulse on how we're doing spiritually. But the answer is unlikely to come in ways that we want to. We will not receive a spiritual report card when we pray. We are not going to be given a number, and we are not going to be certainly giving a measuring stick, from somebody else. We are needing to work on that ourselves. What do I mean by that? I mean that it is important through that reflection, through that those moments of meditation and contemplation, for us to get in touch with ourselves and truly ask ourselves the question of whether we are making progress. Because we also know that in our conscience are written the guidelines, the manual, so to speak, of what is it that we need to do and should do. And so we need to make time and space to listen to our consciousness. Of course, we can pray and ask for guidance, but we need to examine our hearts and see whether we are a little bit better today than we were last month, whether we are taking action on ourselves to become better human beings and by consequence, better spirits. That's how we know we're going. And that is an area that we are sorely lacking in. We don't make time as a society to take stock of ourselves and our actions. We are really quick to judge others. We are really quick to point what's happening in other people's lives that we think should not be happening or should be done differently. But we are not really taking accountability for ourselves and making a concerted effort to improve ourselves. We are just wanting the world to fix itself around us or to mold to our desires. But at the end of the day, we really need to figure it out with ourselves. How do we change? Because if we don't spend the time doing that now, if we decide that we are just going to wait and see what happens next, then we are going to make peace with it. We're going to have to face it when we discarnate, when we are on the other side. And then our spiritual guides are going to come talk to us. We're going to be a little bit more aware of things because we are not going to be so blinded by our physical essence that kind of prevents us from being fully aware of things. And we are going to feel bad about it. And we're going to have to come back and do it again. So if we want to speed the cycle, let's have those insights here. Let's not wait until a whole life goes by for us to reflect upon how we lived in the physical world when we are there in the spiritual world. Let's do the course corrections now. I often think about that as like a GPS, right? Before the GPS, we would print out directions or we just know directions and we follow the directions and we would just go from point A all the way to point B. And when we got there, we might realize that, oh my goodness, maybe I got to the wrong place, or maybe I made a left back turn there. And now I have to backtrack and do all this, and figure. And I got to go backtrack and figure out what the right path is. But with GPS, now that we set our direction, we know that if we take a wrong turn, that little voice is going to come in magically speaking from the conscience of our, mobile devices or our car and says, recalculating, right? That we now have to think about a different route to get where we want to. So let's not wait until we get lost to recalculate. Let's take stock every single day at every turn. And then if we do take a bad turn, it's easier for us to course correct quickly while we're still here. We don't have to wait until we are all the way on the other side. So there's hope. But we need to look into ourselves. And that is hard work because everybody believes that when they begin to look at themselves, they might be the worst people in the world because we can see so many things that are not right with us. That's normal. When we begin to look into ourselves, that happens. But we also have to remind ourselves of the progress that we have made towards things. It's okay for us, especially in this moment when we feel so insecure and so hurt and so alone, for us to celebrate the good things that we have done. Look back into your life. What is it that you're doing today that you are better at than you were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, a year ago? Celebrate those things too. Don't focus just on what you need to improve and are not working well, right? Celebrate the fact that you are making progress. And by looking in yourselves, you will know what is it that you need to work and how you're doing.
Thank you, Dan. We have a question, another question from the United States Spiritist Federation. Can we disconnect from those spirits holding us back?
We can. And it will happen. It is the law of nature, right? Everything must progress. And so we know that this will happen. On a collective stage, we kind of examined a little bit of this today, saying that those who are holding us back, if they really insist on holding others back and they're not making adequate progress themselves, they are going to be moved from this opportunity of evolving here on earth to something else. And we see allusions to that even in the Bible. For those of you who might like to look at that, we talked about the parable of the wheat and the tares, where in the beginning everybody starts in the right place, and then you can't really differentiate the wheat from the tare until it grows. Once it grows, they look the same. They're very similar. But once they grow, we see that one bears fruits and the other one not so much. And that's when, as a farmer, you can separate the tare and toss it into fire, right? Really powerful language in the Bible sometimes that we see in many different ways, right? Like where there's a separation. There's also a part in Matthew where there's a separation of the goat from the sheep, right? Left and right. And so there is a clear allusion to in the Bible that there is a separation spiritually where we need to understand that the fire and this exile that people are sending to, they're not punishments. They are opportunities to course correct, like we talked about in the GPS. That is to say, it's an opportunity for us to understand that we were holding other people back, and now other people are going to hold us back, and we'll know how we feel. And that way, we're going to work forward and make progress. So, yes, this will happen as a group, right? So, it's happening right now. Many of the spirits that are incarnating have already been told they will not have an opportunity to incarnate again, that they are now going to be relocated into a new learning environment. On an individual level, we too can disconnect from the spirits that are holding us back. We just have to remind ourselves that we have flaws and perhaps we have done things that we're not proud of, but that we also need to move forward. And by focusing on what's ahead of us, on what change we want to be in the world, that will provide a natural disconnection point. If you are arguing with somebody that you don't like, but you continue to argue with them, you engage with them, you are going to permanently keep connected. So if you don't want to have annoying people around you, right, arguing with you and pulling you down, then don't engage with them. Don't keep track on this idea that you have to tell them that they are annoying. Just simply move on. Just simply focus on the things that you want to do. Otherwise, we're going to hold ourselves hostages to the very things that we don't want. If we are in unhealthy relationships, let's disengage from them. If we are in unhealthy environments, let's try to move on from them to healthy ones, little by little. And sometimes that's hard, but it is always within our possibility, our control to make different choices. And that should be reassuring and uplifting as well.
It is reassuring. Thank you, Dan. And we have a question from the TVCEI International Spiritist Council. What can we put in our toolbox to help us find balance and peaceful thoughts in our daily lives?
Another interesting and powerful question. We can go back to that which uplifts us, right? If we know that we are struggling through these times and that we need tools and techniques and activities and mindsets to change the way we behave, then we have to be very intentional about developing, keeping them. Our toolbox also needs maintenance. We also need to take care of our tools, otherwise they don't work that well, which means that we have to pay attention and practice. Some of these tools have been in front of us. They are already in our toolbox. We just have to use them and maintain them, right? A screwdriver is only effective if we keep it in good condition, right? A drill, it will only work if we keep it charged and we keep it lubricated. So it's important for us to pay attention to the tools that we have. We don't necessarily need a lot of new tools. We just need to go back to the basics. We know, for instance, that we are not physical beings by nature, that we are temporarily physical, but really we are spiritual beings. So can we use that tool? Can we use the tool that all religions in the world have given us to tell us that there is a spiritual life? Can you remind ourselves of what Spiritism does so well, which is to tell us in no uncertain terms that we are spirits temporarily on earth who are then going to eventually return to the spiritual realm and continue in this exchange of experiences until we are such a level that that's no longer needed and we are operating at a different level. So remind ourselves that we are spiritual beings and that what we are experiencing now is temporary, and that we are tasked with a beautiful task and joy and quest to help improve this planet, and that by our actions we can have an incredible amount of impact in the world today. By our kind actions we can help others and they can uplift us, but all it takes is for us to recenter and not let ourselves be caught by the illusion that the world is only physical and that satisfaction can only come from enjoying physical things. None of that is true. And I think that we know that in our hearts already. The things that fuel us, the things that uplift us, are those of an emotional, spiritual peace. Yes, it is okay for us to be happy with a new watch, a new car, a new home. That's wonderful things. But the reason why we are happy about those things is because they are feeling a need that's deeper than just the material things. A home is really feeling a sense of belonging in place, for instance, and we're happy about that. We may lose that home, we may buy a new home, but it is not the physical place that matters, it's the sense of us being okay with ourselves and knowing that we are loved. And when we remember that there is always loving coming our way, that our toolbox of prayer, of meditation, of reflection can always be leveraged, it becomes quite a bit easier for us to go through the challenges of the world. Will it make all the challenges in the world go away? No, but it will help us navigate through it in a way that they don't bother us as much and that we can keep focus on what truly matters. And that's the toolbox we need, just to use the things that we already have, to have some time for reflection, for pondering, for contemplation. And of course, all this would allow us to be that change that we desperately see in the world and need.
Thank you very, very much, Dan. And thanks to everyone who watched today's talk live and those who have been following our weekly Spiritist Talk series. Don't miss next Saturday, July 15th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, when Gisada Korngold will be speaking about decodifying sleep and dreams according to Spiritism. Dan, before we close the live today, would you please offer a prayer?
It will be my pleasure. And if that's okay as well, Bradley, I would love to invite folks to stay connected if they can, keep in touch. We are so little, so few in the spiritual community in the world in general. We would love to have an opportunity for you to be in touch. You can find me on social media. You can subscribe to my newsletter, visit my website. I just want to be in touch with folks, exchange ideas, because I know that that is how we grow, by having this lovely exchange of experiences and perspectives, which is what the United States Spiritist Council is doing so well by having so many different people come here and share perspective on different topics. So thank you to the USSF. Thank you for everybody who's listening. And I invite you to join me then in a small reflection and a moment of gratitude as well. As we take a moment to just be here, be with ourselves, take a deep breath. We are taking by gratitude to have this physical experience, to be able to be okay in this very second and moment, to leave behind anything else that troubles us and dive into the certainty that as spiritual beings, we are loved, cared, and tended for by God and by so many spiritual benefactors and so many spiritual friends who cheer us on and support us from the spiritual realm. So we ask God, please remind us constantly of our spiritual nature, that we have come here to go through a series of challenges and that we are going to succeed because you are behind us. And please let us also leave our mark in the world, a positive one, where we are giving our contribution to the making of a better era that is to come. Give us the strength, the fortitude, the patience, and the tolerance to understand that the world is going through a major change and that it is normal that during change, things can get difficult. So give us the certainty that the world will be a better place. Remind us of what we have learned through our different studies and inspire us to be kind, tolerant, and accepting of others, even when their perspectives are different than our own. Because it is only when we exchange perspectives that we are introduced to something new. And it's only when we are introduced to something new that we learn something else. We are grateful for the presence of all our friends in the spiritual realm, but also very grateful for all the colleagues, friends, and siblings that we have here in this physical world, which make the journey so much easier. grateful for all the knowledge that we have access through our religions, through spirituality, and especially to us through Spiritism. We are thrilled to have a chance to make a difference in the world and ask for continued support and inspiration. Thank you, God. So be it.